Right. Hello, willkommen, bienvenue, konnichiwa. Time for another Armist Inquisition yet again, episode 312 on Sunday, the 14th of January 2024. I'm Phil.
I'm Ben.
And, 312 episodes. Can you believe this? And we've never done one on the Knights Templar. Can you believe that?
That is crazy, actually.
It is crazy.
Sure
Yeah.
we must have referenced bits and bobs here. And
You would think, wouldn't you? Anyway, never mind that. We're joined by historian and author Mark Olly tonight. How are you doing, Mark?
Not too bad, not too bad. I'm surviving the cold weather.
It's meant to get even colder tomorrow.
Oh, I know.
Talking about snow.
the white stuff.
Yeah.
Oh,
Aye.
God.
Yeah.
It'll bring the whole country to a standstill. We know it will before it even happens.
Well, better get the chains on the tyres.
Yes, get the chains out. I'm having to shoe sheep on my way to work this last week.
You don't put shoes on sheep, mate.
Shoeing sheep off. I'm working up near Burnley, up in the hills. And it's one of these places you got to go over, drive over cattle grids and shoe sheep out of the way.
Wow.
I know, so I'm dreading it next week. Well, hopefully I'll get snowed off, but, you know.
Very good. Burnley. Put Burnley way.
Yeah, Reedley Hallows, it's called. Sounds like something from Harry Potter.
Yeah, it does.
But, anyway, tell you what, Mark, you wouldn't happen to know out about the Knights Templar, would you?
Right. You're back.
Hello?
Yes, and you're back.
Hey,
Mark.
fantastic.
Honestly, it should be the Friday the 13th today, I think, Mark, shouldn't it?
It's the curse of the Templars creeping in. I can feel it in my bones.
When did, what was the last thing you heard us say? Did you hear the music come in and everything?
Yeah, everything was fine right up until you were talking about shearing sheep.
Right.
Oh, well.
Never mind. We'll just keep going because, well...
Okay, you can always edit that bit out.
That was really unprecedented.
That-
we never have
yeah.
technical issues here.
That was weird. Yeah.
So, anyway, Mark, Knights Templar, Mark, you must know something about them. Can you help us out?
Yeah, where do you want me to begin? Do you want me to start at the beginning?
Well, where did they come from?
Did they operate
Okay.
in the day?
Okay, they're very much a product of their time. So what you've got to remember is that they weren't the first warrior monks, and they were the first knights. You know, knights and warrior monks were around from the days of the Anglo-Saxons onwards, and there were orders of knights back with the Romans. So basically, they're building on what is already quite a long tradition. Some bright spark, comes up with the idea for Crusades. I can't remember exactly which pope it was under, but anyway, there is a call to crusade, and a whole shed load of knights decide they're going to go off on the first crusade. I think they leave in 1096, they get to Jerusalem in 1099, and by the time they get to Jerusalem, obviously they've all talked to each other, so you've got the beginning there of two orders of knights, actually. Most people think the Templars are the first, but they're not. The Knights Hospitaller come first. Dead easy to remember. One's black and white, that's the Knights Hospitaller, and the other one's red and white. Although it gets a bit confusing further on, but that's basically what they are. One uses the spiky cross, which is what they find in Jerusalem, because they're at the hospital. The hospital was built by the merchants of Amalfi, and they have this spiky cross. I mean, we know it now as the Cross of Malta. That's what it is, with the spikes on it. So they adopt that. Yeah, we'll have that in black and white. And then the Templars, they go slightly different. They adopt a circle with this sort of splayed red cross in it, which they only get granted officially on the Second Crusade. So it always upsets me when you see these people doing reconstructions on the History Channel. They're flying down the hillsides going, yay, First Crusade and all that. Whopping great big red target on the chest. They'd have only lasted 2 minutes in the desert. That would have been it, a couple of compound bows, and they would have took a lot of them out. And they don't get that second cross. They don't get that till the Second Crusade. So at the beginning, they don't have that. The way they got together was interesting, though, because according to the history books, certainly what the Knights Hospitaller have written themselves, they said, we started in 1113. So, clearly we were the first. And we don't officially get a start date for the Templars till 1118. But in between, in the gap, I think it's the Bishop of Chartres writes about the Crusades, and he says, over in Jerusalem, there's this newly forming knightly order called the Knights of Christ. That's in 1114. So you can almost imagine what's happening here. You've got Knights Hospitaller. They've had a fantastic time. The Pope's gone, yeah, I'm going to recognise you as an order of warriors. Fantastic. 1113, they get the charter through and they're able to do all sorts of different things. And then all of a sudden they bump into the Knights Templar, probably in a pub in Jerusalem, and over a pint, the Hospitallers are like, you want to get into this? This is a good idea. Why don't you guys do this? So potentially as early as 1114, the Templars are already starting. They're already beginning. I think they had 9 knights at the beginning and a few servants, but they only had 4 horses. So that's why you get this weird symbol of a horse with 2 knights sat on it. Yeah. It's not some, peculiar sexual ritual, or it depends who you read, but it's nothing to do with that. They just couldn't afford more than 4 horses right at the beginning. What I do find interesting, though, is by the time it gets to 1123, so the Pope's already rubber stamped it, you know what I mean? Yeah, you've got an order of knights, you can protect pilgrims, on the road from Jaffa to Jerusalem. Well, there's still only 9 of them. They've still only got 4 horses, and there's tens of thousands of, Islamic army, right in front of them. They could just wipe them out anytime they want to. So that's what begins the whole mystery about what they were doing in Jerusalem. Why were they actually there? Yeah. Because in terms of the job description, they're pretty much useless, right. So that's really how they get started anyway. Yeah.
And originally, the first original, like you mentioned, there was about 9 to start with. These were quite well-to-do, wealthy Norman types, weren't they? They weren't sort of, they had to get, the story, again, depends who you read, but the story is they had to sort of give up a lot of their worldly goods and whatnot to become a member of the order, no?
Yeah, they start that whole tradition off. Basically, when they get together, these big families basically donate everything to the order. But there's a bit of a twist there as well, because I think it's one of the King Henrys of the UK. He kind of rubber stamps them at the beginning. And then one of the kings of France, he jumps in, he rubber stamps them. And then you end up with the Pope, he rubber stamps them as well. So, everyone's sort of in favour of it. Patriarch of Jerusalem, he thinks it's a good idea. So it's not just the guys that you see, in the red and white on horses in the Second Crusade. It's not just them. By the time you've hit the Second Crusade, they've already got a lot of wealthy backers and wealthy supporters who are clearly looking to make something back on their investment. So again, that feeds into the mystery of what exactly are these guys up to? What is it they're trying to do? What is it they're trying to achieve? The ultimate outworking of that, of course, is Richard the Lionheart. He ends up, part of the order, and it's his family line. It's the Plantagenets that are really pumping money into them for that first period of them being established, and then thereafter, so they've got loads of wealthy backers.
I mean, I suppose the most interesting one is the Vatican, the popes, because you get this picture that these chivalric orders, that you've got the Teutonic Knights as well, and the Hospitallers. They're almost a law unto themselves. It's like they don't have to obey orders from kings. They answer solely to the Pope. Isn't that right?
Yes, and there is a number of them, as you say. It's not just the Knights Hospitaller and the Knights Templar. The Teutonics are German, but you've also got the Knights of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, who are essentially attached to the Patriarch of Jerusalem. You've also got the Knights of Lazarus. Their symbol's a green cross on white. If you happen to run across them on the battlefield, you'd sort of edge slowly away from them because they're all lepers. Okay, wow. So they're an entire order of leper knights. So you imagine if you're on a battlefield, you come face to face with some guys with these big green crosses on. They do not care They're going to die anyway, so they really don't care. So that was an order that was in Jerusalem at the time as well. You know, and like I said, the merchants of Amalfi, they had knights that were attached to them. The Temple Mount, they had their own order of guards and knights. So, you know, it's a bit like if you think of the movie Kingdom of Heaven, there's loads of people wandering around in that movie with loads of different insignia on, and because they're all members of different clubs, and some of the clubs are bigger than some of the other clubs. The Templars, by about the Third Crusade, they are big. You know, it's only really the Knights of the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, who can claim to be as big. And then somewhere sort of number 3 are the Teutonics, you know, and then number 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is everybody else. And again, like you say, self-governing, you know, they take the vows of monks, you know, which is poverty, chastity, and obedience. To what extent they stick to that over the years has been very hotly debated. You know, the later it gets in the order, because basically you're talking about 300 years. You know, they begin in the late 1000s, early 1100s, and they end in inverted commas. We'll come to that later. They end in about 1314 to 1335. So you're only talking about a period of about 300 years. Incredible, absolutely incredible what they achieve in that time span, though.
Well, that's a good point, because a lot of people speculate that sort of part of their mission, once the first crusade had succeeded, and you know they were set up on the auspices of shepherding pilgrims from was it Acre and Jaffa,
the coast,
like the route where people were liable to be attacked by bandits en route. That they had other missions, side quests, if you like, while they were there. Maybe even archaeological side quests.
Absolutely. In actual fact, most people credit the Templars as being the world's first official archaeologists. I take odds a bit with that, but some people do take that. What they do, basically, the reason they're called Templars is they end up in this building called Solomon's Temple, and it's joined onto the side of the Temple Mount. So if you can imagine the Temple Mount as a big flat rectangle with the Dome of the Rock in the middle, they're stuck on one end of it. They literally have one end of it. And certainly up to about 20 years ago, if you went with a guide and they showed you around this Solomon's stables, they'd show you the mosque, they'd show you the area where they were based inside the stables, and then they'd show you the Templar tunnel. Now, the Templar tunnel is this enormous tunnel that they were digging, and they were heading for the area just beyond the Dome of the Rock, which is where the Holy of Holies and the Holy Place and the Tabernacle and the original temple, where that would have stood. Now, when the Muslims built the Dome of the Rock in the 7th century, they put it next to where the original temple was. So actually, you have to overshoot it to get to the temple site. It was a nunnery. In medieval times, that area was a nunnery. And they were tunneling under it to try and get to the basement complex. They clearly found something, because they became incredibly rich. So, mind you see, this is where the Vatican debate creeps in. There's 2 practical points worth mentioning, okay? We've had the Dead Sea Scrolls and we've had the Nag Hammadi Library, both of which are somehow connected to early Judaism, the Hebrews, when the Romans were there. It's connected to that period. So the question is, was it gold, silver, and precious stones in the Ark of the Covenant, or was it another cache of material similar to the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Nag Hammadi Library, which, at that point, 1,000 years ago, the Catholic Church would have paid a fortune just to get that material out of circulation. So that's the first thing. I'm leaning towards it, being more about information that they didn't want to get out. And the second point to make is you've got this conspiracy where people say, well, if the Vatican had that, they would hide it in their Vatican library in the basement, which incidentally looks nothing like the Da Vinci Code. Okay, forget all these hermetically sealed glass, cases with wonderfully catalogued, shelves in. No, it's nothing like that. It would take probably 100 scholars about 300 years to actually get through what they've got on the shelves. So it's not a conspiracy. It's just nobody actually can get in there and get hold of it all. There's just too much of it. I can't remember. I think somebody said there's 3.5 miles of shelving. There's 2,000 years of information down there. So I don't think it's necessarily a big conspiracy. I just think it's practicality.
Right.
I mean, they're not brilliant at translation, as we know, because Nag Hammadi Library was out in 3.5 years, because the Americans got hold of that in 1945. But 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls, we still don't know if we've got all of it.
No, and there's a conspiracy around that. I read a book not so long ago. I think it was Bajent and Lee, the same guys who read Holy Blood. Was it Holy Blood, Holy Cross? Holy Blood, Holy Grail? I think they did a book on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And,
they did.
And they talked about it being sort of like a closed shop, and that they were generally all Catholics or Jesuit scholars who were employed in deciphering or doing the translations, apart from Allegro, from Marco Allegro.
Yeah.
And we all know what happened with him.
Yes. Yeah, that is in a nutshell. That's what happened. But I think that something very similar to that happened on the First Crusade. I think they hit something that was, as radical. I can't get my head around the idea that, well, if it was gold or it was silver or it was anything like that, then it would be enormously significant. But they wouldn't try and hide it, and they would just feed that into the economy of the order. Now, yes, the order became fantastically rich, but that is because over time, people were dying and they were leaving all the money. As you said, rich families were leaving all the money to the Templars. Also, they invented the traveller's check. So, Manchester, you could dump like 100 pieces of gold into the preceptory at Manchester, and they'd give you a check that said, I promise to pay the bearer, 99 pieces of gold when he gets to Jerusalem. So only the bearer of that could actually get the money out of the treasury in Jerusalem. But then they made a piece of gold, times that by 300 years, and you've got an enormous amount of money, a huge amount of money. So I think that's really where that comes from. That's the origins of the Templar treasure at the end.
Right, yeah. And again, it's this idea of people were getting robbed on the way to the Holy Land. And so they solved the problem. They found a way, they came up with a way of solving the problem. We've got that much, what would you say, liquidity that we can take your money, in London or Paris or wherever you are, and we can doff it back out when you reach Jerusalem. It's ingenious.
Yeah, it's a safe bet.
Yeah. I'd like to get more. Well, let's talk about the actual knights in battle, because they have this incredible reputation for valor and being this incredible fighting force. So where does this come from? What is it about the Templars that seems to make them stand out on the battlefield and make them so feared by the enemy?
Okay, there's a couple of things that feed into that. I mean, if I just say nasty Normans, everybody knows about the nasty Normans, 1066 and all that. They come over here and there's only 1,600 of them, 1,600, and they take over the whole flipping country. So these guys, they've been kicking ass for a long time. They know how to fight, and then it gets worse, because blow me if they don't go full time. Because basically that's what the Templars are. They are the world's first standing army. So not only were they good to start with, but now they're even better because they can do this full time, It would only take a small number of Templars, really, to cause a lot of problems. I think Acre was an example you gave. I seem to remember the Muslim army numbered between 30 and 40,000. And the defending army at Acre, which was Templars, was 500. So that gives you some idea. Admittedly, at the end of the day, they were defeated. And they had to cheat. The Muslims actually cheated in order to defeat them, because they sent an envoy in and said, look, if you just surrender and you're come marching out now, there'll be no problems. We'll let you go. You can get on your boats and sail away. Well, a lot of the Templars and a lot of the people that were a bit more savvy than that got on the boats and left anyway. But the Templars that were left who did surrender, they just massacred. They just killed them on the battlefield, because they would have remained as a fighting threat. Also, if you think, it's Viking logic as well. Don't forget that Normans is just another word for Northern French Vikings. So the Vikings in battle, they wanted to die with a sword in the hand. And they came, as far as they're concerned, once you do that, you go flying into the mead hall in Valhalla. You're a hero. That's it. Your eternal life assured. So they basically took the same logic and applied that to Christianity. And it was okay, we'll acquire swords, and if we die in battle, we're straight in there, no worries at all. And all the sins were automatically absolved when they joined the order. The Pope that was it. So there was not a cat in hell's chance of them ever getting roasted in hell over a slow fire, They were doing God's work, and that was that. So when you put all those factors together, you really didn't want to take on the Templars. They were an enormously professional and very motivated fighting force. That's what they were, with loads of resources, shed loads of money, and everything going for them.
I remember a story from, I think it was Dan Jones's book on the Templars a few years ago, and he tells the story of one of the knights. I can't remember his name. It would have been some French name. Godfried Bouillon or something. And he would like, on the battlefield, he would stake himself down to the ground with a rope attached to his waist. Like, that's it. I'm not going anywhere. Talk about fight to the death. I mean, they were, what's the word? Well, you could call them like fanatical, really.
Tenacious.
Yeah, they are. They're pretty much suicide warriors. That's what they are. What can I say? They really, really didn't care. I mean, it got to the point I think I'm right in saying it was by around about the time of the 4th or 5th Crusade, in southern France, they've got the records there for membership of the various preceptories. They're missing everywhere else, but they've got them for southern France. And it turns out that female knights outnumbered male knights at a rate of about 2 to 1. Because what was happening was the male knights were just dying. They were fighting so hard that they were all getting wiped out. And of course, whoever the noble lady is, she inherits everything that her husband has. So they were inheriting all the money. They were inheriting all the castles and the armor and the horses. And then they were joining the French preceptories as female knights. So by the time you reach Joan of Arc, who's 100 years after the supposed end of the order, by the time you get to her, female knights are quite common. They were actually quite common from the Anglo-Saxon times through the Vikings all the way onwards, because they had this idea that if the knight was away, then his lady literally became the knight. He handed her the keys to everything, and whatever he would say, whatever authority he had, was automatically passed to his lady. And that goes all the way back to late Viking times, when they were getting on ships and sailing off to do, rape and pillage and plunder and all that. Then the lady that they left behind was in charge. She was left in charge.
Wow. We've sort of hinted about them carrying on. Maybe we should skip forward a bit to the end of Friday the 13th, 1307, and King of France. Is it Philip the Fair? Is it
Philip the Fair? Yeah, it was Friday the 13th, as you say, when he decided he was going to, attack all the preceptories and arrest everybody. But unfortunately, somebody leaked the information. So on Thursday, the 12th of October, the Templar Navy sailed away from France, took all the money with it. And most of the preceptories he decided he was going to arrest people from. It was like, 2 old guys and a dog. That was all he found, literally, I think in the entire of France, the whole of France, apart from the leadership who stayed behind, I think there was about 400 or 500 knights that he actually arrested. And he did it because he owed the Templars 2/3 of everything. So 2/3 of the land, 2/3 of the money, 2/3 of, well, literally his kingship, he owed to the Templars. So the logic was, right, if I get rid of them, if I dissolve the order, I won't owe them the money anymore. But the irony is that the Templars also gave everything they had to the neighbouring Hospitallers. So about 400 years later, I think the French crown was still fighting the Hospitallers as an order to try and get all this money and property back, which they've never got. They never actually recovered any of it. So everything he did was just a disaster. It was a complete failure. Yeah, continuity. Continuity is a good one. I'll give you Britain as an example. Britain's a great example. We had 3 kings at the beginning of the 1300s, all called Edward. So you got Edward I, Edward II, Edward III. And the Edwards really liked the Templars. They absolutely loved the Templars, thought the Templars were brilliant. So when the King of France decided he was going to kick off in 1314, I think it was Edward I said, do you know what? I'm just going to ignore him. I don't care. I'm just going to ignore him. So it dragged on. Edward II, exactly the same. Edward III, so you're now in 1334. By that point, Edward III said, I think we'd better do something. Okay, lads, you're just going to have to get out of the way because, you know, you're still on papal lands. The Pope still has influence over you. You know, you need to, you know, disappear. But they'd had all that time to give stuff to the Hospitallers and to move elsewhere. Right. Now, the Pope had no jurisdiction whatsoever in Wales or Ireland or Scotland. So by the time Edward's like, you know, Edward III's like, you need to go, lads, they'd all disappeared. They'd all vanished into other places. And what does Edward III do? He starts the Order of the Knights of the Round Table and he starts the Order of the Garter. So it's like, okay, we can see what's going on here. This is rebranding. You know, that's basically what you're seeing, medieval rebranding. So you get all these other orders of knights popping up. You get things like, you know, all of a sudden the Swiss flag has got a red cross in the middle of it on a white background. Oh, wonder where all the money went. You know, and the mercenaries. There's other orders like the Knights of the Fleur-de-Lis, Knights of Calatrava, can't really say that. Knights of Malta and Rhodes, you know, all these other orders, they're popping up all over Europe, but mostly working as mercenaries for landowners, in some cases Catholic landowners, who need knights. They just need these people to work for them. And that's where most of them go. So a lot of these other orders you get, and of course they never touched the Hospitallers, they never touched the Teutonics. You know, nobody went near the Knights of Lazarus. You know, you know, Knights of the Holy Sepulchre are still there. Patriarch of Jerusalem is still there. So really, it was only the Templars that really got clobbered, and they just went somewhere else.
That's because of how successful they were economically, would you say?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, they had the ability. They knew they had commanderies. They had you know, caravanseries. They knew the road system. They had the biggest navy. I mean, it tickles me up. You know, this navy goes sailing off on Thursday the 12th under a black flag with a white cross on it like that. So what do? They stick a skull over the white cross. Ta-da, there you go. We're a renegade navy. You know, we're not making any bones about this. Oh, look, we are. It's on the flag. You know, we're now pirates. You know, and that is recognised as the origins of pirating.
The Jolly Roger.
You know? Yeah. That's back to the Templars again. You know, it's incredible what they achieved and where they ended up.
What do you make of these whispers and rumours of the Templars going to Scotland and fighting with Robert the Bruce?
Okay, I can exclusively reveal from Masonic sources, right? So we're going from the guys now who have a vested interest in trying to find out what the hell's going on. From Scottish Masonic sources, they've gone back to several of the chapels that are known to be connected to the Templars, surrounding particularly the battlefield for the Battle of Bannockburn. Now, the reason they did that is that you got 60,000 English knights and a king versus 10,000 Scottish farmers. who are basically brandishing pitchforks at them. And what nobody can understand is how 10,000 Scottish farmers can get 60,000 knights to pack up shop and clear off back to England. Nobody could get their head around that. So that was the reason why they went digging for this information. Because in the records, it's already known that some band of camp followers, suddenly appeared. The English thought they were reinforcements and cleared off. That's not the true full story. Because in 3 of the documents that they found, the reinforcements are clearly illustrated as knights dressed in black and white. Now, you can imagine the English are sat there. They've just booted like the Templars out. It's not far after 1340. I can't remember Bannockburn's 1340s, I think, 1330s, 1340s. And they're confronted by the medieval equivalent of the SAS. And they've got no idea how many of them there are. And they're coming over the top of the hill to reinforce Robert the Bruce and the Scots. Well, at that point, it's game over, isn't it? You know what I mean? Because we've already discussed, you're not going to win. In a best case scenario, you're all going to die. So, the king being what he was, because Edward was not young at this point, he was quite old. He clearly took the easier route and he packed up shop and went home. But the Masons have done the due diligence and they've dug that out of the documents. There are these knights there in black and white. So I don't think it's a theory anymore. I think we're now at the point of saying, yeah, that is pretty much what happened.
Wow.
Well,
I like that.
I do.
I just find it fascinating, this stuff. They're so connected, like you've mentioned Freemasonry there. I suppose architecture, that's another good sort of area to go into with Freemasonry, with the Templars, because they're often connected to the Gothic cathedral building age, and maybe they had some expertise in that area.
I can tell you a great story. I'll turn in. I'm now going to turn into a medieval bard. There's no evidence that this story is true, but I'm going to tell you it anyway because it kind of illustrates the point. The idea was that in the 1300s, when Richard the Lionheart got over there and decided he was going to attack Saladin, the idea was that they met up before the battle. And basically, Richard the Lionheart turns up with his massive double-handed broadsword, real big piece of kit. And his armor plated from head to foot. And he walks up to this timber platform, and Saladin sat in his throne on top of this timber platform, in all his Islamic glory. And Richard the Lionheart walks up to him, and he sticks this sword into this wooden platform. He just, he kind of goes bang, and he goes, "That is the might of the English army that has come against you." So what Saladin does is he very calmly draws out his scimitar from his side and just holds it next to him. And a servant walks over and drops a silk handkerchief onto the blade. And the silk handkerchief just goes oomph, like that, cuts in half. At which point it's said that the two leaders became friends. Now, that tells you all you need to know, because the Islamics were better at language, they were better at weaponry, they were better at tactics, they were better at medicine, they were better at astrology and astronomy, and more to the point, they were better at architecture and mathematics. There's a brilliant story that one of the Templars over in Derbyshire, which is not a million miles from where we are, at one of the churches over there, brought a couple of Moorish architects to Derbyshire in order to build his churches. It's in the historical records. And you could look at the church buildings. You can very clearly see this Moorish architectural influence, and a shed load of Templar graves as well, which kind of gives the game away. So clearly they were employing a lot of these Middle Eastern connections in what they were doing, Absolutely, yes, totally, 110%. They had the guys over here helping them out with buildings. You've only got to have a look at Chartres Cathedral. That's really the benchmark. Go and have a nosy at that. If you want to do it in this country, go and have a nosy at Roslin Chapel. The same mentality is in both buildings, Roslin's interesting. Roslin actually does prove in a way that the Templars continued, because that dates from the 1400s. And the best thing you can do in Scotland is just go and have a look at the clan burial grounds, because you've got burials from like the 1000s, the 1100s, 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, 1600s. You look at the actual style of the burials and nothing changes. They're all the same. You've got the same depictions of contemporary knights right through. You've got the same Templar iconography. You've got the same language. I mean, I'm speaking as an archaeologist now. You know, there's just no break. It never ends. So you can see where they're getting it from very clearly.
This is the Sinclair family, who were originally the Saint Clairs, another French knightly name, isn't it? Who sort of sponsored this chapel, which is like there's that famous pillar. Is it the Apprentice pillar?
Yeah. This is the family that sailed to America in, was it 16? No, it was 1223, was it? They sailed over there. I've been to Roslin. It's a great thing, because I walked in and I'm wandering around and I'm looking at, you know, all the decorations and that, and there's an arch over one of the windows and they've got corn on the cob going over the arch, and you're like, you're not telling me they didn't go to America? Where the hell did they get corn on the cob from? You know, pretty bonkers. If you really want your mind blown, there was an excavation down in London. I think it was Canary Wharf. I'm right in saying they were excavating Canary Wharf, and in the layer from like the 1220s to 1230s, they got a banana skin. So it's like, what on earth was going on? You know, clearly they were all over the place doing loads of things that just later got attributed to Christopher Columbus, who incidentally was attached to one of the orders of knights that survived after the Templars. Really? You know, his patron was an ex-Templar. You know, the cross on his sails is a Templar cross, you know. And more to the point, where the hell did he get his maps from? How did he know where he was going? You know.
Right, yeah, because, well, there was controversy with his brother, wasn't there? That his brother may have stolen some maps or copied some maps and claimed that they were his own, or something. Something's ringing a bell in my head about Chris's brother.
They'd be the Islamic maps, I would imagine. Yeah, there were a lot of maps knocking around in the area where Columbus was at that time. Most of them came from the East. You know, they'd travelled over from Islamic and Moorish sources. And clearly they were copying them, you know. But then why could it not equally as well have been maps that were owned by the knights? You know, you got the biggest navy in the world, which the Templars did have. You know, Columbus is only 100 years after that, and they tended to hang on to everything back then. So why would you not have Templar maps? You know.
Yeah, we just sold this story, aren't we, about Columbus? Which I mean, it's unravelled so much over the last couple of decades. I remember reading that Gavin Menzies book about the Chinese treasure fleets predating Columbus, and they seem to have been everywhere, circumnavigated the globe pretty much.
It's called 1492, isn't it? The book, if I remember rightly, and they had ships that were the biggest ever seen. The Chinese, absolutely enormous ships, you know, carrying hundreds of people. Yeah. So, yeah, clearly things are not quite as the history books depict them.
Yeah, several different squadrons. Like one squadron went, I think, via the Spice Islands, and then one squadron went north, like to the Arctic Circle. One ended up in Antarctica, the ice wall, as we like to call it.
Well, we already know the Vikings got to Greenland. We know that because you've got Lonson's Meadows, which is the site in Greenland. But now they've started jumping down the Greenland coast, the archaeologists having a look. And I think there's another one lower down that looks like it was Viking. And then obviously you've got, if you watch Ancient Aliens and all these kind of programs on Blaze and what have you, you know, they've got all kinds of stuff out there. But I knew that because of a book by a guy called Barry Fell that was written in the 1970s, and it's called America BC. And when it was published, it was banned because it shows everything. You've got Romans, Egyptians, Phoenicians, you know, Chinese, Irish, Vikings, you know, medieval. All of that stuff was what he was interested in. And he brought all the evidence together. And of course, the Americans went, oh! We can't have this.
Wow.
So it disappeared, but you can still get it. I'm sure it'll be on Amazon.
Yeah.
Back issues.
Talking about the Templars going up to Scotland, do you think, does this play into the Freemasonic connection? Because it seems to me, from what I've picked up, that there is a definite link between the Templars and Freemasonry. Some people think it's just symbolic, or maybe it's the Freemasonic orders were trying to emulate the Templars or something like that. But I don't know. Where do you stand on the links between them?
Okay. As a historian, I've dug into it. I'm fortunate enough to have had some access to the Masonic material. I've had quite a few things passed to me over the years as well. The argument in Scotland is that they have a habit of engineering things backwards. So actual datable stuff, if you like, at the earliest is probably late 1400s, early 1500s. That's your problem.
Right.
So you've got a gap. Whichever way you look at it, you've got a 100-year gap. Then if you go from Scottish Rite, you decide to have a look at English Rite, you've got an even bigger gap, because that's early 1600s with a couple of scattered references going back into the late 15s. But it does appear, I've got to say, it does appear fairly convincing that there's continuity there. But you've got to bear in mind, because you're coming up to date now, that what history seems to be showing us is a bit of a confused picture. You've got this idea that the order actually kind of exploded, if you like, in 1314 up to about 1340, and it's scattered to form all these other different fragmented orders. So you could broadly say, okay, that's Templars rebranded. That's one branch. But then also in the 1380s, the Pope at the time said, well, we can't find anything wrong with these Templars. We don't know why it's ended up the way it is. We're going to dissolve them anyway, but actually we secretly like them, So there's a possibility, in a Catholic sense, that the original Templars carried on as a religious order, in one form or another. They could have survived. Then you've got the Masonic Templars, and they're unashamedly, claiming a link back to, the scattering of the Templars. So you've got them. And nowadays you've got independent orders. And in Europe, like the Independent Order of Templars of England and Wales, which exist, they are currently leading 18 other independent orders, all of whom can trace their lineage back to one or another branch of the Templars. So it's clear that well, counting Britain, there are at least 19 other independent branches that have survived. So really, you've got the scattered rebranded lot, you've got the Masonic lot, you've got the ones the Catholics really rather liked, and then you've got these survivalist orders that are still there. So far from them disappearing, I think there's a lot of evidence to say that there is continuity there. I do think there is some continuity.
Going back to the dissolution, they were accused of all sorts of awful things like heresy and sodomy and occult practices and whatnot. Do you think there's any truth in that, or is your reading that this is a King Philip propaganda campaign?
Well, it's interesting because, okay, the same identical set of accusations that were leveled at the Templars, I think it was in 1307, that they came up with them and executed them in 1314, that identical same set of accusations is used against the witches. So the witches in the 1500s and certainly the 1600s, those accusations against the witches are identical. They didn't even bother to change the commas and full stops. You know what I mean? They just copied it over. So the first thing that they did was deal with the blokes they didn't like. And then the next thing they dealt with was with the ladies they didn't like. And they just used the same formula. So that smacks of a stitch up. I can't say it any other way. That just looks completely false. However, this is where it does get a bit interesting. Some of the accusations make sense. There's one in there where they say they worshipped a head. They were accused of worshipping some kind of a head. Well, yes, they had a lot of reliquaries of saints. So the worship of, heads was not that far out of, out of kilter for that day and age. But if they had the Turin shroud, and the Turin shroud is the cloth of Edessa, when it was folded up to be displayed in Edessa, the only thing you could see of the shroud was its face, was its head. So I don't see a problem worshipping that. What's your problem here? It's only the same as all the other things the Catholics were worshipping. So yes, I don't think there's a problem with that. Now, the idea of spitting and stamping on the cross, that's an interesting one as well, because archaeologically, the whole idea of being called a Christian and wearing one of those things, Roman torture implements around your neck, only occurs in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th century. So it's not something in the 1st and 2nd century that any of the early Christians would have recognized. They just wouldn't have known what on earth it was all about. Also, it represented what I'm going to call churchianity, but a medieval form of churchianity. So it was a particular type of branding, that was used at that point. But if you actually knew what shape the real cross was, then you would certainly treat that Roman torture implement as being an insult. So when you're being initiated into the Order of Templars, why not stamp on it? Why not reject it? Why not become a Templar, which is what they were doing? And trust me, it's completely the wrong shape. You can't actually crucify anybody on something that shape. It's impossible. It doesn't work. You're going down the Monty Python route, where the whole thing would collapse and the person would simply fall off. The Romans were doing 600 to 800 people a day. There's no way they would have dovetailed, glued, roped, pegged, screwed, nailed, all the crosses together in the middle, and then tried to stand up a structure that's only got one single center column. There's no way they would do that. 600 to 800 times a day. They had 2 uprights, and you carry a beam called a stauros, which is true to the New Testament language, and you just hoist the beam on top of it. And that's it. So your cross actually is a cross beam with 2 uprights. It's basically the shape of a door. That's what shape it is.
Wow.
And it doesn't take a genius to work that out. I'm sure the Templars would, with access to the original documentation, so we're back where we came in, with access to that knowledge and original translations of John and all the Islamic Sufis, of course, who've never changed their tune. Religion in the Middle East has always been the same. That must have come as a hell of a shock to European medieval Christians. It was definitely not what they expected. And they end up becoming a completely different, essentially a Gnostic type of religion. That's what the Templars become. So the accusations could actually be true, but wouldn't necessarily present a problem. That having been said, I think they do go a bit far with it, with the accusations. The whole idea of sodomy and, all that sort of thing. It was any male-dominated order, that accusation was, leveled against them over the years. Probably still is, but it doesn't make it true.
No, I can see the sort of idolatry angle as well, that maybe these Templars would have seen worshipping the cross as being a form of idolatry. But I mean,
it's the first commandment, isn't it? You shall have no image.
Exactly.
There you go. Boom.
Yeah. So they could be seeing a whole sort of what would you say, like the way the religion was moving at that time. We get all this. There's a massive explosion of iconography in the medieval era, isn't there? With the cathedral building and these massive stained glass windows and the sculpture and everything, and that maybe just rubbed them the wrong way, I guess.
Well, it's the origins of, give us your money or you're all going to hell.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is nonsense. There you go.
Just going back to, you were talking earlier about maybe they were finding documentation in the Holy Land, maybe dangerous information. I wonder if this ties in with the Holy Grail in some respects, meaning the royal blood. Do you think there's any possibility that they got intel about descendants of Jesus, and that's what they were keeping secret?
Okay, I know we haven't got an enormous amount of time, so I'm just going to, shoot it's a duck and say it how it is. There's no bloodline because Jesus did not have children. The reason for that is he fulfilled all of the Old Testament law. And if you check out Deuteronomy, whichever male breaks the virgin is married to the virgin. So legally by Old Testament law, not biologically, I hasten to add, but legally, he was entirely responsible to take on the sort of Adamic husband role for his mother Mary. And that is exactly what you find in the Gospels. He acts as a husband throughout. So he would never have taken on another partner. It just would never have happened. The whole idea of, the Grail being, the womb and the bloodline. And, I cringe as a historian and a scholar, because all of that's come up in about the last 60, 70, 80 years. It's a myth. It's a modern day myth. If you went back into, Victorian times, just, a couple of hundred years ago, you would not have found that. That is not the case. I've just got a book out as well. I hope I can say this right. It's called The Polychronicon of Merlin, Joseph and Arthur. It's on Amazon, and that explains in graphic detail exactly what a Grail is and how it works and how it functions, and why all this modern stuff is nonsense. So if people want to get it in hardback, because it's a glorious book in hardback, it looks marvelous. So dash out and grab that. But no, there is no bloodline. People are then going to jump on that and they're going to go, well, hang on a minute. Somebody called Jesus went and evangelized India, to which my response is 23% of the population of Jerusalem were called Jesus, because Jesus is an anglicization of Joshua. His real name's Yeshua. Yeah. We only changed it so we didn't get him confused with the bloke in the Old Testament. Even as a brother John, who is a stepbrother, who actually physically resembles him. And it's said that he went to India. So I don't have a problem with somebody called Jesus wandering around India who happens to look, messianic, evangelizing them. That's not a problem, because there were tons of them. They were all over the place. But it's not the dude that dies on the cross. Absolutely not. It's not the same. It's not the same guy at all. Yeah. Confusion sells books.
Well, it's so murky, isn't it? That first couple of centuries after the event, there's very little sort of solid information. There's just the odd quote here and there from Pliny or Tacitus or whatnot, and then all of a sudden we have this explosion of Christianity. It's like, whoa, where did this come from?
Yes and no. Okay, yes and no. I'm just about to start working on a book, which I'm going to call it, hopefully this is the working title, The Keys to the Temple. Because what I want to do is I want to have a look at those first couple of centuries and try and, set the boat on the right course kind of thing. But actually up to now, I think I've got 800 documents that fit in that time period that are relevant. So, yes, you've got Pliny, you've got, Josephus, you've got all these people outside of biblical writing, but then you've also got Old Testament Apocrypha, New Testament Apocrypha, Dead Sea Scrolls, Nag Hammadi Library, all the other scrolls that have turned up since. They're coming from all over Egypt. There's tons of them. There's stuff out there now, things like the Gospel of Judas was turned up recently. There's stuff that most people don't even know exists that wasn't around when they put those, quote, original versions together. Plus the fact modern translators have really took some terrible liberties with the Bible. If anyone wants to study it, get your Revised Standard Version, because the New International Version leaves about 600 verses out of the Old Testament and about 250 out of the New, for reasons that are beyond me. Get yourself there's a NRSV, a New Revised Standard Version. That's particularly good because that's got all the rest of the stuff in it as well. Get one of those with an Apocrypha and it's rock and roll. You're off, you know what I mean? The one you're talking about is Constantinian, post-Constantinian Christianity. By that point, the Romans had already come up with this insult. They were calling, Christians, because that's what they came up with. And all of a sudden, Jesus looks like Zeus, you know what I mean? Because that's basically what Constantine wanted. And the whole thing is Romanized. It's rebranded, But again, people in the first century would not have recognized, half of what was going on. But even then, if you dig through the Constantinian stuff, It's little details. It's like his mum, Empress Helena, goes over to the Holy Land and she brings back, various bits and bobs, bits of the cross, and a robe and a few other things. But it very clearly tells you that she brought back 4 crucifixion nails, not 3. She brings back 4, which implies that he's nailed with his arms and legs apart, which is the door structure. Okay,
Yeah.
and that is supported by archaeology. So even then, even in the kind of years of nonsense, there's still a few little rays of light that slip through. You've just got to look, you've got to know where to look really to find that. I love the fact that Constantine's probably buried under a burial mound in a cow field out next door to a pub near Care Efrog, just outside Wrexham.
Really?
I think Viraconium, Wroxeter, the Roman city of Wroxeter. There's actually a place called Constantine, basically, and I think he's Eton Constantine, and he's said to be buried there. So you need to go and buy the King Arthur book.
Yeah, definitely. Good shout.
Yeah.
I read a decent book recently. Well, it's an old book about the catacombs. It was an analysis of the catacombs in Rome. I'll drop you an email if I remember what it was called.
Oh yeah, that'd be fantastic.
It might be useful.
I've been in those. I think I've got some little. Don't tell anybody, but I've got some little pieces of bone. I couldn't resist picking up some little fragments of bone from the catacombs. So I've got them in an archaeological packet somewhere, clearly labelled, so people know what they are.
Oh, you're probably safe then. That sounds official. Well, Mark, this has been fantastic.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, we should let you go. We've blown over an hour already.
Oh, we really?
Yeah.
Gosh, I don't feel like I've got started.
I know. Well, you're going to have to come back and we'll maybe do a different subject next time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
further down the line. Yeah.
Or the other thing is have a look at all the other mysteries that we didn't cover, and I'll just do a Templars part 2 if you want.
Yeah,
I'm quite up for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We've been 6 years without Templars. We deserve a rich vein of Templar.
A binge.
Yeah.
Templar
There
binge.
you go.
Right, Mark. Well, this has been fantastic. Thanks once again for joining us. And folks at home, check out Mark's book. It's the best thing just to search on Amazon. Is Amazon the best place, Mark?
Okay, I'll finish on a very, very, very quick advert. Okay, if you want any other books, because I think there are 9 different books in all now, they're all on Amazon. The whole lot is on Amazon. So just type my name in. It doesn't matter how complicated the name of the book is. Sooner or later you'll find it because there are 9 of them on there. If you want to see me in action doing any of the media stuff I've done in the past, it's all on YouTube, and it's all in one place. So go find Drake, Michigan. If you go find the Drake, Michigan site, it's all on that. And if anybody wants to contact me, again, really simple, Facebook, and just drop me a line on Messenger. Come and friend me. As long as your name's not Fifi Trixabel and you're not like a fairy with a rainbow as your picture, and you're some trucker from Birmingham, 40-stone trucker. As long as you're not kind of, trying to pull a fast one, I'll accept you. I'll friend you. So that's it, really. It's Amazon, YouTube, and Facebook. Come find me.
Smashing. Well, you heard it here. Right. We shall sign off for this part and return in 10 or 15 minutes for and open the phone lines, eh?
Yeah, let's do that. See you on the other side.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, Mark. Thanks once again for joining us, and wish you luck with the new book as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Pleasure.
Okay. Stay on the line for us for 1 minute, Mark. You lot out in YouTube land. We'll see you very shortly. All right. Ta-ra.
Cheers.
Bye.